Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining. We are so excited to have you here tonight for today's North Shore Learning's Blueprint for Better Schools webinar. We are so excited. This is going to be a wonderful, impactful conversation tonight, where whether you're joining live or watching the replay. So my name is Shannon Galladay, and I'm going to be asking the questions, and I'll also be reading the Q&A questions at the end. So this series is all about real-world solutions to challenges that educators and leaders are facing today. From teacher burnout to inclusive practices supporting sustainable student-centered schools. We keep things short and impactful, so will be 30 minutes of meaningful insights. We'll leave space at the end for your Q&A, so go ahead and drop those as we go along. We'd also like to welcome everyone. I know we have they said the chat box isn't working, so we're just going to the Q&A box, and we'd love to welcome everyone. We have people from California, welcome, and Texas and Florida. Yeah, keep it coming where you're from, or if you are a teacher or from a school, or if you are from the media, we'd love to recognize you. So today's conversation is Make Teaching Sustainable Again. Burnout isn't inevitable. We're excited to be joined by two thoughtful voices in education. So first, let me introduce Dr. Jessica Werner, the founder and CEO of North Shore Learning. She's a mother and a former educator and researcher with over 20 years of experience. She founded North Shore Learning to help school leaders and teachers turn the latest neuroscience into practical sustainable change. She has worked with schools worldwide as an instructor, a professor of education, and a classroom management, and a consultant. She is passionate about helping to equip educators to work with students with varying academic and behavioral needs. Dr. Werner specializes in behavior support, including social and emotional learning, student regulation, and self-management, holistic approaches to student behavior, and communication for general classroom students and students with additional learning needs. So before I introduce Jennifer Bateman, I'm going to jump back into the chat. I've seen a lot more people posting. So welcome from Nebraska, Honduras. Welcome from the Discovery School from, I'm going to say it wrong. How do you say that? Jess, do you know how to say
Tegucigalpa.
Thank you. There we go. Welcome from the Dominican Republic, from Minnesota, former principal and teacher, currently working with nonprofit public schools in the areas of accreditation. So welcome. Excited to have you all here. So joining us today is Jennifer Bateman. She's the Senior Vice President of Youth Development at Boys and Girls Clubs of America. With 22 years of youth development experience, Jennifer leads national programming designed to strengthen positive outcomes for kids and teens. Prior to her current role, she worked with state agencies and youth-serving nonprofits to develop quality standards for out-of-school time programs. She holds a master's in education and childhood development and psychology from Harvard and a PhD in development psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. So we're so glad to have you here, Jennifer and Jess. Welcome. So excited. So I will be asking the questions tonight. Some will be directed individually, and some will be directed to both of you. So first, we're going to start with a question to Jennifer. So the question is, the burnout for teachers is high in schools, and the students are not doing okay. Are you seeing burnout with the youth development professionals at the Boys and Girls Clubs also?
Absolutely. I think we're mirror a bit of what we see in school systems, and staff experience a broad range of issues that contribute to burnout. For example, our goal, our mission at Boys and Girls Clubs of America is to serve all young people, especially those who need us most. And so in most youth serving organizations, you're going to see young people with a history of trauma or behavioral support needs, communities where there may be violence, community instability, poverty, and young people don't just walk into a club and leave all that behind. So we've really had to expand our supports and how we think of positive and holistic youth development to say, okay, we need to back up and not skip that first rung of the ladder, but make sure that we're bringing all young people along, because it doesn't matter if you're offering great programming, workforce readiness opportunities, if you're leaving 2/3 of young people behind because you're not stabilizing the environment, the experiences, and relationships that they need. And I was a youth development professional. It's how I started my career in Boys and Girls Clubs, and was called on to do academic support as an education director. But the young people that I stood in front of, and I hear this so much from staff people, came to the club with really basic needs: behavioral, nutritional, trauma histories. And you're standing in front of those young people, and if you're not equipped or empowered, given the decision-making authority, the tools, training, and resources to address those needs, you can become demoralized in your role, because that's what calls you to the mission, both in education and in out of school time. So the way we really think about it is that staff deserve a high level of support in order to deliver high level outcomes. And staff well-being is the core driver. We have data that shows that when staff well-being is in effect, young people experience 2 times the positive outcomes, and their colleagues experience 5 times the positive effects of being in a positive culture. So for us, it's the centerpiece. We think of staff well-being as a youth impact strategy, and it's core to the work we're really doing right now to enhance mental health and trauma-informed practices in clubs and expand the way we think of positive youth development.
Well, thank you. That's incredible what you're doing and, making such a big impact. So thank you. So the next question is directed to Jess. Your perspective is in the schools. So teachers are quitting in droves. What do you think is driving this, and how is it being presented?
Well, first of all, if any teachers want to weigh in the Q&A, please do, because you all are the ones living this daily. But hearing the way Jennifer explained it, it's so similar to what it is in schools. We find the data tells us student outcomes are so much better when teachers experience higher well-being. And now that we have some more clear data back on what it means for teachers to feel well at school, we see the huge impact it has on learning. And like you said, Jennifer, a lot of this is teachers aren't feeling effective meeting some of the basic needs of students. Like, behaviors are escalating and have changed pretty profoundly in the last 5 years. Um, what students are dealing with outside of school and inside of school is a lot, and it manifests itself in different mental health problems for students of all ages. I have to emphasize that all ages we're seeing. And for teachers who maybe have a traditional training like I had, and we used our books and we talked about theory, what we're seeing now is so different and so challenging that a lot of people don't feel like they can effectively meet student needs. And so, as you said, it can be demoralizing, and it can also cause a lot of compassion fatigue. People who want to show up and will show up, but want to make sure that they have the skill set to be able to work with the students in front of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're seeing the same problem across the board in both organizations. Jess, so what are some invisible or overlooked contributors to teacher fatigue that school leaders often miss?
I wouldn't say it's missed necessarily. I think behavior can be pretty obvious, but I think it's underestimated in a lot of our school partners. The amount of just first of all, to backtrack, students are learning differently today than they did before. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but the student learning experience is very different. And when the students aren't learning or their needs aren't being met, it can manifest in behaviors. And so teachers end up feeling like they lose a lot of their teaching time during the day, kind of putting out little fires or big fires. And so people are worried that they're not going to make their academic time, they're not going to get prepared for tests. And I would say across the board in our partners worldwide, behavior is the number one thing. Number two, maybe this is a little more invisible, but just workload. The teachers are asked to do so much, and it comes from all angles. It comes from home, it comes from the state level, it comes from the district. There's so many new initiatives that are new and exciting and that states are implementing, and in a lot of ways they haven't mastered the foundations of learning for what their students need right now. So it all just feels like a lot of different a lot of different things coming at them.
Mhm. Absolutely. So Jennifer, what are you seeing in the clubs as far as staff, caregiver fatigue? How has the Boys and Girls Club seen this manifest, and why do you think it exists?
We're hearing a lot of the same things that Jess reported. We're hearing in some cases where there might not be the investment from staff or leadership, the funding and supports and resources that are needed, the professional development is key. Lack of maybe paid planning time. The diversity of our clubs is really significant. So it's not universal, but those same investments are actually what turns the needle or moves the needle is when there is leadership buy-in, when it's not just seen as a line item or a program, but that staff well-being is seen as kind of a core feature of and the first investment, because really smart clubs understand that when they're investing in staff, it translates to the young people pretty quickly and pretty directly. We at Boys and Girls Clubs, we say, to see the club experience, you have to be the club experience. And that really means for us, if you just do the same thing, youth development is just great adult development. If you do the same things for staff that you would do for youth and you don't skip over them, they then translate and manifest that with young people. But a lot of what Jess shared is similar. If we're charging frontline staff, many of whom are young and come from the same communities and experiences as the young people we serve, to suddenly stand in front of young people who meet their academic needs, their nutritional needs, their behavioral needs, their workforce readiness needs, and to fill in all of these gaps without the appropriate training, it just doesn't help them feel skilled and do what they're driven to do. And we really need to take a step back and say, how do we work more collectively to do this work, because a whole child needs a whole collective of services.
Absolutely. And so what feedback are you hearing from the staff as, what do they say they need the most support with?
Mm-hmm. They need, first and foremost, leadership buy-in. The way we think about this is from our national office, we help our clubs build capacity to do this. But we really look for readiness. Is a club really going to step into the journey? Because there's limited support and there's limited services and resources. Leadership buy-in is fundamental. So when this work shows up as a core strategic and operating potential or plan, when it's invested in, it's not just a program, but it's a whole approach. We call it not a curriculum, but a culture shift. When a organization is willing to change their policies, their programming, and not leave that one staff person alone in an isolated island doing the work and trying to use their influence to make change, we look at those indicators of readiness. And then we go all in with those organizations, because we believe as the adopters of that work, they're going to change the entire movement, and they're going to convince other leaders and other professionals why this work is so important. And so we've been building our momentum and cascading our efforts like that.
I love that, a culture shift. That's so much more impactful to make a change. I love that. So Jennifer and Jessica, or sorry, yeah, what solutions actually work to help prevent burnout? So this is to both of you. Let's go with Jess first.
Well, I feel like Jennifer just named a couple, and I'm so impressed, by the way, with the metrics that you all measure at the clubs. I'm thinking so many of our school partners could use access to the similar metrics, because there's a lot of anecdotal data that we see and collect in schools, but not as much of that hard data that you're talking about. Solutions. Absolutely, it starts at the top. Leadership buy-in is number one. And the leader, you're so important. You set the entire culture for the school. You're the CEO. We say you're literally the CEO of the school, but you're also the chief energy officer of the school. And it all trickles down from there. And leaders understanding the people who engage with us. I mean, we're a little biased because most of the people who engage with us are that type of person who say, what can we do? What can we do? And some of them lead amazing schools, right? Who on paper look like they have no issues, but they're still saying, what can we do to improve culture, to learn more about our staff needs, to support the students who are coming in our door. And I think really just supporting the staff with professional development, that's the number one. And I don't know how excited anybody is to hear that, because it's a lot easier to throw other things at the problem, like giving people the afternoon off or a pizza party. But the data is telling us the number one thing that is keeping people feeling that they have the agency and the effectiveness to work in schools is feeling that they understand what they need to do to support the students. And that comes from really targeted professional development.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Echoing, I'm always going to be an advocate for fully integrated solutions that embed in every aspect of an organization. But starting with a shift of a mindset from self-care, Jess just alluded to this, from self-care to collective care. I think we think of burnout as an individual failure, and it's a systems issue, right? We are not set, if it's not working and it's leading to this over and over again, how do we change the system to address upstream what works? Investment in staff well-being can look like a collation of a number of practices that you just start to integrate into how you work: reflective supervision, pulse checks, debrief huddles, intentional connection to the broader community, so you're not alone in your work. Even simple things like having a floating staff, so when a staff member calls out, the whole system doesn't crumble, but you have a plan for that. Clarifying roles, so you're not feeling like you have to carry the weight of the world and everything that comes up, but who do you delegate that to? Systematizing rest. I love out of the box thinking. Take risks. We have some clubs who have said, this might be unpopular, but we're going to close once a month to do professional development and rest. And what they saw, at first that was, we would never have done that because that means not serving the kids that day. But then we saw service improve. We saw the culture improve. We saw staff retention improve, and the way that they were able to practice and program with young people improved. So ultimately, we saw better outcomes. But you have to sometimes take a risk to think out of the box and systematize new ways of being. And I've even been to clubs that offer mental health services and groups or individuals to staff and families. Well, that might become more of a typical storyline for young people, but stepping back and saying, do we have mental health supports or group therapy for our staff? But I want to come back to something Jess alluded to. This is all about a mindset shift first and foremost. Behavior is communication. We have to think about what our staff and what of our young people trying to tell us. It's not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, and how do we need to show up differently? Because there's too many behaviors showing up and saying we need a different approach, both in terms of staff burnout and in terms of young people's needs and behaviors.
Well, thank you. So going on to Jennifer, please tell us about the trauma-informed program that was implemented in the clubs and impact it has had on the participants.
Sure. So when we say trauma-informed practice, that's a really clinical term, but we really worked with our out-of-school time clubs to say, what does this work mean to you? How are we going to take what good looks like and translate it to the context that you work in? And it really meant leaving no young person behind and taking that step back to say, young people are going to come with the whole history of who they are, staff are too, and we refuse to leave them behind. So we're going to take a step back, and whether that means teaching emotional regulation, really diving into social and emotional learning, taking the first 2 weeks of a program year to teach young people how to move and what the expectations are in that environment, re-examining our policies, giving professional development on the neuroscience of trauma, all of that, building the entire toolbox across the organization, positive discipline policies. What we see from that is it's not just for young people that have a history or staff that have a history of trauma, it's an all boats rise. And so this is for us the new positive youth development. It's more holistic, it involves staff, it involves families. It's not a program, it's a whole organization approach. And we've had incredible partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kohl's, that have been in this work with us for many years. But what it means is that we really support local clubs and specialists in those organizations that get trained over a 6-month period to embed in those organizations and be the champions and expert in those work, but link back to what we were talking about before, which is readiness. So do they have the buy-in from their staff? From their leadership? Do they have investment in their budget for this? Because we know when they have certain things in place, they're actually able not just to make change in their club, but they make change in partnership with local providers. They make change in partnership with local schools. A lot of our clubs are in schools, for example. So their impact spreads beyond just the nucleus of the club.
That's incredible to make such a huge impact. So Jess, what are you seeing schools do successfully to help address the burnout? What do you think we need more of? Programs, initiative, funding for? What do you think?
Oh, funding, right? Like more funding is always needed in schools. Um, what have I seen that's successful? First of all, schools who acknowledge teacher well-being, and this is by, and I recommend it if you're a school leader, actually collecting data on it. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy or crazy. It can be one-on-one conversations, it can be a survey, but I think it's underestimated how well-being is impacted just by what we see of people in the hallways or in the staff room. And what's interesting for myself and my team, because we work so closely with teachers, we get we are confided in quite often. We're kind of treated as counselors as well as coaches because we're available. And so I notice there's a disconnect almost always between what is perceived and what is real. So I believe that schools who even start by measuring in some way, it could be really simple, to find out what the state is for teachers. And within that, even asking, what is most challenging for you? Because that is the data that tells you where to plug in for PD. And if you're seeing behaviors, you know that you need to go there. I'll tell you, when you collect data, you're going to get a lot of data. And some of it is without, when people can tell you what they would like to see change, some of it is outside of our control. I work in a school in Colombia, in Bogota, where when I gave teachers a well-being survey, many of them came back and said, it would really help if the traffic was better here. And agreed, like the traffic is terrible. But just knowing you're going to kind of hear what are all the pieces that are impacting, and then plugging into those specific things. So really planning around what the information is that's coming from teachers. I would say for teachers too, and for administrators, don't be afraid to reach out to your community. I feel like the Boys and Girls Clubs, sounds like you do this amazingly. Partnerships with community stakeholders are a big piece of your relationships. I think we have in so many of our schools, we have parents who would be ready and willing to step up and invest or offer therapy or help connect with resources. And I always tell teachers this, don't be afraid to ask. It might turn out that nobody can help you, or it might turn out that you can get more help than you expected. And for leaders as well. And I want to say too, I think for all leaders listening, the number one thing you can do to show your staff that well-being is important is to take the time for yourself as well. So model the well-being, model, like Jennifer said, rest when you need to rest, model boundaries with your workload. I'm not going to be able to respond to emails after this time. It's really important because teachers see that. And just anecdotally, somebody was telling me they were in a training and the person giving the training was a district level employee, and the training was on well-being, and everybody needs to take care of themselves. And the person who was in the training said, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the woman facilitating, she gets here every day at 5 a.m. She hasn't taken a sick day or a vacation day in 8 years. So again, how are we modeling for our staff that this is really okay?
Absolutely. I love that, modeling the behavior and really getting to the root of the problem. I think that's such great advice. Thank you. This question is for both of you. So how could a Boys and Girls Club like trauma informed model perhaps be used in a school setting with teachers? Who would implement that? How would you envision that to look? So yeah, Jennifer, if you
Sure.
want to speak to that, and then Jess.
The first thing that I think of in response to that question is that almost every organization or school already has a champion in there. They might not have been surfaced yet, but when you do the call to action, there are people that have personal issues or a personal connection to the work. And you just need to start by identifying A, the champion, and two, the things that you are already doing well that are trauma informed. When you look at great youth development practices, there's almost no organization that's not already doing some of those things. They're just not thinking of it from the lens. It's an early win, it's a strong foundation, and it shows you what not to throw away so that you're building on those assets. Once you find those two, you really need the leadership buy-in, right? The fact that with that, it gives you the time and the authority to integrate best practices across policy, programming, professional development and practice. And you can start with really simple things. I mean, sometimes we think of this, it sounds so big, it sounds so clinical. We always say you don't have to be a therapist to do youth well-being, right? At all, right? That you can be a mentor, you can be a coach, you can be a teacher, but it shows up in the smallest things like classroom design or morning meeting practices or how staff meetings are restructured to do emotional check-ins at the beginning. It can be the smallest tweaks, and then you gain the momentum through those practices and say, well, we've done really well with that, and look at the benefits. What else can we tweak? So just examining the current way you do things and say, what tweaks might we make to these existing structures without upending the entire system to make it more human-centered?
Absolutely. What do you think, Jess?
Yeah, I echo what Jennifer said. What it's interesting, and you mentioned this too, Jennifer, we know now we have good programs around trauma-informed practices. We've like a lot has come up, especially in the last decade. We have a lot that we're pouring into students, but we forget that the teachers don't automatically have this skill set. They're not counselors, most of them. Um, and so I found that things like even talking about what regulation is, how co-regulation works in the classroom, these are things that I think we take for granted, people know, but unless you were a developmental psychologist or maybe an occupational therapist, you might not know it. So some of those things that, and it used to be, so the school counselor would come in and give the SEL curriculum, the trauma informed curriculum, and the teacher would leave and get a break. But yeah, I think it's so important to remember, like you said, this isn't just for students. It's really for humans. It's for everyone. And so even offering some of those basic trauma informed SEL practices for adults as well.
Great advice. Yeah, thank you both. So I see the questions coming in, and we'll get to those questions before we finish. If you have questions, please go to the Q&A. We'd love to hear your questions. So you can go ahead and post those there. So before we go to the Q&A, I just want to end with something tangible. So this is for both of you again. What is one small change every school or club could make tomorrow to move in the right direction? We've talked about a lot of things. So what could they do tomorrow to move things in the right direction? Let's go, Jess, and then Jennifer.
Okay, and I actually took a peek at the questions, and I'm going to kind of refer to one of the questions. My advice is really for school leaders right now, because it's you're responsible for a lot of people. You're responsible for a lot of students, for the adults, your faculty, and family. I really encourage school leaders to get into the classrooms and have quick one-on-one conversations with teachers as much as you possibly can, because this is where you start to get the information, both that is said around well-being and also that's unsaid. And so the number one thing I would say is walkabouts. It can be spontaneous conversations. One of the things we like to say is try and make a goal of having one 15-minute conversation with every staff member every month. That's not even necessarily about school related things, but that is, and so for the person who is asking about what do you do if the leadership doesn't have the culture mindset shift, this is so tricky because there's only so much you can do and so much you could advocate for yourself. But that's why I like really speaking to leaders and saying, go out and ask questions and find out and collect data. And don't be afraid of what you're going to hear. Sometimes I think people worry. A lot of this is solvable. Things like student behavior, we know how to help teachers with this. This is a solvable problem. Traffic, uh, unfortunately, I can't solve that for you. But the ones that we can, let's figure out what they are and let's tackle them. And so I would say just collecting data, getting out, talking to people.
Absolutely. Thank you. What do you think, Jennifer?
Such a good answer, Jess. I would say I'm changing my thinking on the spot here. One of the most effective things that was so specific that we ever did at an organization was we took our staff and we took our youth and we wrote every name on a little post-it and we put it up on the wall and we asked a couple of questions of every single young person. Do they have a community? Do they have a coach? Right? Do they have an advocate? And we looked at our staff and we looked at our young people, and when we couldn't identify a young person or a coach or a mentor for a staff or a young person or a community, we put those together and that became an intentional target because it really sought to undermine a connection crisis, right? And it reframed how we put both young people's needs and staff needs in correlation with each other and connected with each other. When we saw young people that didn't have a connection, we saw that they were in staff experiences and rooms and programs that didn't have a connection. And we're like, oh, these are the hot spots. This is the culture that we need to change. And I think it made everything really personal. It made everything really individual. It gave everything a name. And that changed the way that we viewed how we had to undertake the work.
Thank you. Great actionable steps that we can take to, solve this problem. So thank you. We just have time for two questions. So we'll go to Daniel. So Daniel, he said, Meister Eckhart said, the soul grows by subtraction, not addition. Can you speak to the need of emphasizing the importance of not just adding new initiatives to the teacher's expectations, but making room by taking something away from the list of expectations as well? So let's go to Jess and then Jennifer.
I love this question. We talked about it a lot toward the end of the year when we were working with schools. How can you subtract? And it's actually really counterintuitive because we always think more. And there is a great book we recommend. I believe it's called Subtract or The Art of Subtraction. Really focusing on what are the fundamentals. I will tell you right now, any initiative that is new and exciting, and they all are, like, there's so many cool initiatives happening in schools and there are new ones coming up every day. If you do not have a foundation of safety in your classroom, if the classroom ecology, the classroom culture isn't conducive to learning, no matter what initiative you're pouring money into, you're not going to have the intended impact that you want. So really looking foundationally, and again, this seems counterintuitive because especially in so many of our schools, people have been teaching a long time. You've been teaching 20 years, 30 years, but I keep hearing over and over, you know what, our foundations, we need to look at them again. And so I would just, before your school is thinking about investing in anything new or different, just think, do we have the foundations we need to be able to implement this effectively?
Thank
We
you.
did a
What do
similar exercise to that. We call that core and complementary, where you sit as a team and you say, what are the core drivers? What are core services? What are core drivers of youth impact and what are our core services? And that needs to be 90% of what we do. And then what's complementary? And you are only allowed to have 10% of the total number of services, time, capacity allocated to that complementary. That might be innovation, right? That might be a new partnership. That might be a new funding stream. But if it doesn't meet the core, there still has to be a rubric or a set of criteria that allows it to exist in the ecosystem. And it forces you to make really hard decisions because you're like, that's not core, and complementary is already full this year, right? But I think that exercise of going through that and co-defining that, and then a set of questions that you examine that through is a really helpful rubric.
Definitely.
I love that idea. And I wrote down 90%,
Yeah.
10%. This is a great activity, I think, especially at the beginning of school, to
Mhm.
really learn about how people are understanding the programs and their implementation.
Absolutely. So the last question we have is from an anonymous attendee. How do we support this culture mindset shift and fight for buy-in from leaders that currently might not support or invest in this? Great question. What do you think, Jennifer, and then Jess?
I think that there is an entry point for everyone to the work. I think you need to, a lot of times we think about how are we communicating this? And I'm speaking in my language. I have a certain language, but how am I speaking in somebody else's language? And am I taking the time to understand what their buy-in is? So for example, I work with a lot of like corporate leaders, right? We have a lot of corporate partners. To talk about trauma-informed practice to a corporate partner, like it is not the world they live in, but they understand organizational culture, right? They understand productivity, they understand efficiency. So, how do I get in their head, in their world, and then translate what that need is to their world? And then suddenly you have an openness or a buy in. Or if they have a personal connection, everybody, you have a kid, you have a neighbor, you have a family member, somebody that then makes it personal. Are you spending the relationship time to dig below the surface to get to know someone? You can find that entry point into why that matters for them personally.
Okay, I agree. Everybody should start with what Jennifer said because that's great advice. And I was thinking as you were talking about your corporate partners, even the way maybe we explain our challenges to principals, you know, for principals, behavior, they don't necessarily see all the behavior that you're dealing with on a daily basis, but they know how many behavior referrals are coming to the office. So maybe starting to think about that or collecting data about that. Are you spending too much of your day handling behavior issues? How much? Those are the metrics they understand because they see it and they have to deal with it. Um, so I thought that was a really smart idea. And let me think, I just kind of lost my train of thought, but I wish I could tell every single administrator that because we work in so many schools, that things are harder for teachers than they realize. No matter how experienced your group is, no matter how good things look on paper, no matter the smiles you see, things are harder for teachers and everybody is juggling life. And so there's what they do at school, but a lot of teachers we work with, they go home to families or caretaking for older relatives. So they're literally caregiving all the time. And even knowing that about your teachers, I think is important. There's no rest in their day for giving care. It's just a part of what they do. But I love the idea of the entry point. Maybe there's somebody on staff who has the ear of the administration. And a lot of our schools have leadership teams, senior leadership teams. Maybe that's the team you communicate with. Maybe that is an easier entry point than going straight to leadership. But don't be afraid to advocate for yourselves because I'm really worried too many of our great teachers are leaving and I totally understand why. And like I said, I know some of these are fixable problems. We just have to find a way to get in front of the problem. And often that's getting in front of the leader.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your solutions, giving us hope so that we can help our teachers and our students to have an even better outlook and see the solutions that they can fall upon. So, um, with with that, we are going to hear from Jess and Jennifer. We'd love to know more about North Shore Learning and the Boys and Girls Clubs. So, if you could just give us a little bit more info on that.
Sure. If you want to learn more about Boys and Girls Clubs of America, you can visit our website at www.bgca.org. If you're in the United States, you can find a local club on that site, but also learn about our programs. And we have many, many clubs internationally too. The World Youth Club Federation. And so you can look that up as well and find a club that's potentially where you're from too, and consider partnering, especially if you're from a school system. And whether it's a club or another out of school time youth serving organization, just that collective impact is going to provide so many more supports and uniform services.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to learn more about North Shore Learning, I would be thrilled to hear from any of you. We are found at northshorelearning.org. Um, And you can also find us on our YouTube channel where I post a lot of videos around student behavior management solutions, regulation, co-regulation. So feel free to check out some of the free resources as well. But I just wanted to say before we close, just thank you all for what you do for children and for teachers. Like, your jobs are critically important, and we see you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both for being here. And thank you everyone for watching this live or catching the replay. So we do these every month and we'd love to see you here again. So check your impacts or check online to find out when our next one is. We appreciate you being here for this conversation. We believe better support for educators means better future for students. So have a great night, everyone, and we will see you again soon. Good night.